Hello, I'm Andrew Susskind, and I'm a psychotherapist and author based on the west side of Los Angeles since 1992, specializing in trauma and addictive compulsive behaviors. Welcome to my podcast, named after my recent book and workbook, It's Not About the Sex. Here we have direct and honest conversations related to compulsive sexual behavior and trauma, all from a sexual health perspective. Our intention is to offer fresh viewpoints and practical strategies toward establishing greater intimacy and a more deeply connected life. Let's begin. Chapter 9, Receiving Love. Obsession has always been one of my favorite escape routes from feeling my feelings. Obsession and fantasy involve imagining things that are improbable, and I became hooked on the thrill-seeking that goes along with the hunt for an unlikely conquest. This quest may be sexual, or it may be romantic, but it almost always stems from attachment ruptures. In fourth grade, Melissa was a girl who reminded me of Snow White, and the perfection of both etiquette and appearance. I was drawn to her beauty, grace, and ease, obsessed with the idea of Melissa, not the real person, because I didn't know her very well. Yet, I idealized her and saw her as an escape from all my problems, the first in a string of romantic obsessions that was going to make my pain go away. Ironically, I had no clue how to approach Melissa, so I stumbled and fumbled until she would go to the movies with me. I wish I could say that this fantasy obsession cycle went away, but it followed me into adulthood. When I get lost in fantasy, it's an attempt to feel better, like any drug, but it's also a reminder to look at what's missing or painful inside of me. Generally, if I'm feeling more nourished in my life, there will be less obsession. If I'm feeling depleted, obsession grows. The moral of the story is that compulsive sexual tendencies often involve obsession, but it's not about the obsession or the fantasy. It's an attempt to escape reality and jump into an alternate universe, which provides a temporary salve to the pain.
Well, hi, Andrew. How did you come up with the title of this chapter?
Well, I am a big believer that something that doesn't always get talked about in the 12-step rooms, and something that maybe doesn't get talked about in general, is this idea of opening up to love, basically receiving love. And in terms of long-term recovery from sexual compulsivity, I believe that receiving love is actually one of the greatest healing components, really. And when there's that open channel or that open-heartedness to love, chances of having longer term sustainable recovery is so much greater.
Going a little deeper here, we've talked about intimacy avoidance, and I'm just wondering, how does that tie into receiving love?
Sure. I sometimes say, and it's not 100% of the time, but I sometimes say that if we take somebody who has compulsive sexual behavior, chances are, if we scratch the surface, they're also an intimacy avoidant, right?
Okay.
They avoid intimacy because it's terrifying.
Yeah.
And it usually has to do with something early in childhood. Again, we're talking about attachment styles
Hmm.
where love and any kind of intimacy, any kind of affection was either sporadic or just not something that was consistent for them. And we could get into the different attachment styles, but basically, the one that we're talking about is avoidant
Hmm.
attachment.
Sure.
And so the idea of receiving love, again, is really turning the tables on intimacy avoidance and beginning to respectfully and with gradual movement, finding ways of receiving love.
So once you figure out that avoidance, I know Joni, we talked had her on your podcast before, and she goes deep into attachment theory.
Right.
And it's a lot of understanding and learning, right? So once you understand what type of attachment you have had, it kind of sets the pathway for you so that in any relationship you have now as an adult, you can use that information to learn from and get yourself back on path, right? I mean, it's not like, oh, now I know what I am and I'm fixed. It just kind of gives you some guidelines, which I think is great.
Hmm.
Is this the same as avoidant attachment style?
For sure.
Okay.
For sure. I think what you were referencing before was our colleague Joni Lavick, who is an attachment theory specialist and also an addiction specialist. So she brings the two together in such a beautiful way. And I recommend to all our listeners to go back to that particular episode because it's just so informative.
Mm,
And what I would say to what you're sharing, Sue, is that it all begins with awareness, right? We can feel scared when we're talking about intimacy. We can have what often is talked about as fear of intimacy, right?
right, right.
And yet there's something freeing sometimes to have an awareness of, oh, I'm really scared or sometimes terrified of intimacy. And that goes back to how I was raised. And we're not talking about bashing parents. We're talking about really oftentimes hand-me-downs from one generation to the next. And so the fear around intimacy, the fear around receiving love is often a indication of, ooh, I need to distance myself. Sometimes we say, I'm going to regulate the emotional distance from others.
Hmm.
And that's a survival strategy, right? That's something we need to do sometimes in order to feel safe enough in the world. So, yes, we are talking about avoidant attachment style.
Hmm.
And I wanted to just mention that in the psychoanalytic world, there is a way that they describe this, which is that we're most defended against our greatest needs.
Hmm.
I'm going to say that again. We're most defended, or we could say we're most protected against our greatest needs. So if our greatest needs are love and connection and belonging and all of that good stuff, oftentimes it doesn't matter if there's an addiction or compulsion issue in the mix. Like really, this is universal according to analysts, psychoanalysts say that all of us are most offended against our greatest needs. So in a way, it's about that awareness of, oh, okay, so that's what I've needed to do to regulate the distance, to feel safe enough with people, and to feel like I can take this on because really it's like a lifelong project. I don't know about for you, Sue, but certainly for me,
Yep. But it's so easy to push it away, right? And to build walls.
that's right.
Yeah. But then there's that underlying fear that has a little spark to it, right? And like you read in that story, it was trying that risky behavior, can come out of that fear because it's filling that need to want that love, to receive that love.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
and I'm glad you used the word walls because we all have walls. Walls emotionally are about protection, and sometimes we just need to put up the walls. But if they last too long and they last in a way that we're just push away relationships all the time or live behind that big wall, that's when it can get profoundly lonely.
You're isolating. Yeah.
Exactly. The isolation is profound. And that's generally when I start to see clients come in to talk to me for the first time, is when the pain is greater than that sense of protection.
Right. Interesting.
So why don't I go ahead and read you a brief composite case study about someone named Justin, not actually his real name. Okay?
Okay.
And this is Justin's story, and it's called Unearthing Avoidant Attachment. I don't understand intimacy. No matter what I do, I always feel suffocated with the women I date. They always seem to be unavailable, and I have no idea what I'm doing wrong. During Justin's childhood, his parents were unhappy and distant from one another. Instead of looking to her husband for emotional support, his mother inappropriately leaned on Justin as a confidant.
Mhm.
Though he found her smothering at times, Justin felt important and liked the attention. As a teenager, he became more uneasy with this surrogate husband role, but still felt loyal to her. Justin's father colluded with this arrangement because he felt less pressure to show up fully in the marriage. Through the years, he had multiple affairs. Relationships always felt complicated and burdensome to Justin. In his 20s, he only dated older married women. Unconsciously, he chose unstable relationships that always ended painfully. Justin's dating pattern kept him at a safe distance from real intimacy. In some ways, this felt comfortable and familiar, yet in other ways, it left him profoundly lonely. After several failed relationships, he finally went to therapy and began to identify and understand his avoidant attachment style. Justin began to date single women, and when he felt close to a girlfriend, he would always feel suffocated by them. He would then sabotage it through excessive use of porn and escorts, anything to create distance. As the out of control sexual behaviors became more frequent, he grew more frustrated. Justin was longing for deeper connection, but his intimacy avoidance left him hungry. At age 32, Justin attended his first SLAA meeting, and his quest for deeper healing began.
So there's always a story behind the avoidance, right? And it sounds
Always.
like it also leaves people profoundly lonely at times and
Hmm.
unable to receive healthy love. So, whatever that might mean to somebody, how do they go from being avoidant to tolerating or even beginning to receive love?
Right. That's the big question here, right?
Yeah.
Very, very slowly,
Yeah.
right? It's almost like titrating the closeness from other people because if someone has been regulating the emotional distance for decades, to even suggest that they get closer to someone might activate them or overwhelm them. So, what I always say to someone is, can you be curious about the possibility of getting closer to others in a safe enough way?
Mm.
Can you be non-judgmental about your patterns and some of these themes that we're looking at that haven't been working so well, that
Hmm.
basically worked until they didn't work?
Right.
Right. So I really start from there and see if somebody is open-hearted enough to say, yeah, I really want to talk about this stuff because I'm just miserable being so lonely.
Right. Right.
Or it's almost like hitting bottom in a way. It's like saying, yeah, this love thing, I see other couples doing it. I see other people doing it, and it's like a foreign language. And that kind of honesty and willingness to understand that it's been really like something so distant to many people who come in and look at this for the first time. But sometimes I'll start with something very, very basic, like,
Hmm.
was there a time that you could identify where you did feel close enough and safe enough to another human being, right?
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes they can't locate that. They cannot name a relationship in their past. Other times they'll say something like, yeah, my grandfather was so kind And I remember when I was little, I would really enjoy sitting in his lap because he was so loving and so open-hearted to having me as his grandson. And then we have some place to start, right? We can
Mm,
talk about what was it in that relationship and how is it in your body right now to even be thinking about that experience. I also use pets a lot, as
yeah.
you know
Mm-hmm.
from various episodes. You know, usually if there's a pet in someone's background, preferably a dog, but it could be any kind of pet, um, I'll ask them about their relationship with their pet. And when did they have fun? When were they playful? When did they feel affectionate? And I'll try and open up the dialogue to talk about when they felt like they were generously giving love to another, but also when they received it back. I think
Mm-hmm.
dogs are such amazing vehicles of love, right? So that's just a few things, but I really encourage people to go super, super slow and to just start to envision what it might be like to to very, very slowly experience more closeness, affection, etc.
Mm-hmm. And that awareness piece is huge while going through that process, right? Having the awareness of maybe I have felt this in the past with a pet or, whatever example they might be able to come up with.
Yeah,
And being able to hold on to that memory as something they can, set their goal towards,
that's
right?
right.
As they go slowly through that
Right.
process because it's not easy for sure.
Hmm.
And being super aware as to what your anxiety might be coming, up as like you're even having a conversation about it. Like where is that landing for you? So,
Exactly. Exactly. And then the other piece that I just wanted to mention briefly is something I talk about from time to time, which is finding your emotionally reliable people in your life. And hopefully when I ask someone, you know, who was emotionally reliable in your childhood, hopefully they can come up with someone.
right.
I may be that very first person for them, which is okay too. But
Sure.
if they can locate a person or two or a pet or two that was really reliable, that they could depend upon, that someone who was consistent and they could really count on, that's also very, very important for the nervous system to start to feel like there's something that is trusting enough, safe enough, and loving enough.
Hmm. Yeah, it's like you can find that familiar feeling if you dig deep enough.
That's right.
Yeah. So turning to another page here, we often hear about love addiction. And how would you best describe this?
So this could be another episode in itself, but I just want to clarify something that love addiction as a compulsion is actually a compulsion toward the fantasy of love, not actually love. Like a lot of folks think love addiction is about being addicted to love. No, it's about being addicted or compulsive toward the fantasy
Okay.
of love. Okay. So that's a really, really important distinction. And it usually, not all the time, but usually involves an anxious attachment style, which I'm not going to get into fully, but an anxious attachment often is that eagerness or that worried part of someone where they have to feel like the other person is there and they have to feel
Mm-hmm.
like the other person is paying attention. But it can also involve some avoidance. So love addiction as a term is really tricky. Like I don't use the term love addiction that often anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's all about attachment styles. But because it's been used for many years, what I like to say is that it can be anxious, it can be avoidant, and these are all unintentional. These are all unconscious ways of being with others. But it leaves the individual obsessing about another person, oftentimes as being a possible rescuer, or sometimes a knight in shining armor,
Mm-hmm.
to use an old example. So why don't we have you read for a moment, Sue, and to share the composite case study about Lori to help us illuminate this issue of so-called love addiction.
Lori's story, identifying love addiction. Lori arrived for therapy with tears in her eyes. I did it again. I fell for another guy who was totally unavailable and once again convinced myself that he was the one. I don't know if I can go through this again. I am so humiliated. I had been treating Lori for the past year, and we've been tracking her tendency to merge with guys she didn't know very well and proceed to build elaborate fantasies about them. Although she was well aware of this painful pattern, Lori kept falling into this emotional quicksand. My parents split up when I was 8, and my dad quickly started a new family. Ever since my parents divorced, I felt like I was the stepchild, as he paid way more attention to my stepmother and her kids. Don't get me wrong, I was glad the fighting between my parents finally came to an end, but I was also extremely jealous of my step siblings. They got more of my father than I ever did. Nowadays, when I get involved with a boyfriend, I tend to take him hostage and secretly hope that he will be my knight in shining armor who has arrived to rescue me.
Yeah. So Lori really shows us, she demonstrates how incredibly painful this can be. And so whatever we want to call it, it's really about early attachment ruptures that establish patterns that are super painful. And I just want to say about that obsession can actually be our teacher, right? Some people lump it into something really bad, like you don't want to have obsession. But what it does oftentimes is it reveals parts of ourselves that hopefully helps move toward real love, authentic love, rather than fantasy love.
Yeah. Let's take the time now to read that section at the end of the chapter
Hmm.
called Your Practice. And if you can start with the first suggested practice, then we'll alternate.
Sure. Your practice. Number one, attachment styles develop early on with our original caregivers, so they were established from the beginning. Know that they can be understood and recalibrated through your loving relationships today.
Number two, intimacy avoidance or avoidant attachment styles are self protective and create a way to regulate the emotional distance from others. Consider the possibility of more intimacy in your life to create new neural pathways.
Number three, cultivate the emotionally dependable relationships in your life. You can begin with a therapist or a coach to learn what it feels like to be unconditionally understood.
Number four, breaking through the barriers that get in the way of secure attachment takes shape when you become more interested in emotionally honest relationships than your compulsive sexual behavior. Find the reliable enough people in your life to help you repair the ruptures of your past.
And number five, obsession may seem like a problem on the surface, but can also be a valuable way to get to know deeper parts of yourself. Stay curious and non-judgmental rather than self-attacking or shaming. Thanks for listening today. It was so terrific sharing the time with my colleague and friend, Sue Merlino, and discussing this really meaningful topic. If you're so inclined, please give us a 5-star rating and be sure to subscribe and share my podcast with those who may benefit. I look forward to you joining us the next time. And don't forget to stay connected.